So, Assalamu alaikum. So we don't have Mohammad Faiz here. We don't have Mishal Iqbal. We don't have Ruqayya Sumro. We don't have Nosheen Ashfaq. We don't have Mohammad Shahzeeb. And we have Laroche is here. Yes, Laroche is here. And which Ikra is not here? Ikra or Ikra Shah? And Faizan Ahmed. Then we have Famida isn't here. Aliza. Is Aliza here? Abu Bakr is here, and Abdul Wase. Uh, Thank you so much for being on the online classes of international relations. Welcome back to our virtual section on the topic of deterrence. And we'll be talking about deterrence and various types of deterrence and different components of deterrence theory. And we'll be also exploring about a little bit history in the background deterrence theory. And we'll also try to explore the various dimensions of national security in the 21st century. What are the different dimensions? Because security concept has evolved, it has transformed itself over the years. Now, traditional security used to be only security, which meant security on the borders. Yeah. But now security is essentially means economic security. Security means health security from the pandemics like COVID-19, Ebola virus, Congo, HIV, and other forms of health hazards. Security in the 21st century also means security uh, from the political instability in various countries, um, moving away from the civil war, right? Security also means that country should be stable politically, domestically inside the political domain. Security also means security from the environmental uh, hazards like climate change and global warming and other forms of problems which are related to the environment. So there are various dimensions of security. We'll be talking about today. We have a very important lecture on this topic. So let's start with the definition first. Deterrence is basically a tactic or a strategy designed to prevent aggression by emphasizing the scale of likely military response, realizing the cost of an attack would be greater than any benefit it might bring. Basically, so the deterrence is a strategy, is a tactic, is a maneuver adopted by various countries to prevent aggression of the rival countries by emphasizing the scale of likely military response in case of any foreign attack. So in this situation, when you are applying deterrence theory, you actually convince and convey and communicate your rival or your enemy country that it should not attack, it should not have planning to attack because you also have the ability to retaliate and respond. So deterrence is basically a concept which is even before the war breaks out between nations. This is a kind of an overall planning of a state in which a state plans to respond to the aggressor, those countries who initiate the attack. So deterrence is a preventive strategy designed to dissuade an adversary from doing what it otherwise would like to do. So it's a preventive measure. You actually prevent the war from happening. Uh, so if you know, if there are two states like state A and state B, they are locked in a conflict for over decades, and they would like to settle their grounds, fighting through a war. So in this situation, if state A is facing a threat from the state B, so state B is actually planning to attack various territories of state A. So what state A has options, state A has options to actually communicate and convince and convey to the officials of state B that whatever they have designed, so they are familiar with their design, they are informed about the foreign threats from the state B of an incoming attack. So in that situation, they have all the resources. They will be utilizing all the resources of defense, troops, tanks, jets, whatever they have, even in form of nuclear weapons. So they will communicate. They will convey the message to the state B that whatever they have planned, they should not go with their plan, because if they go with their plan, state A also has a plan to attack and respond quickly. So it's overall a preventive strategy. Deterrence is basically states do deter each other. They discourage, they dissuade the adversary from whatever they have plans to attack. The policy of developing a lot of military power so that other countries will not attack your country. So it is about when you have this for acquiring this capability, you need to be a militarily powerful country enough that uh, you are able to respond to the foreign aggression. Now, there are two concepts um, in this situation in the subject of international relation. One was deterrence theory, which we have talked about. The other is compellence. COMPELLANC. That's not compliance, right? Compliance something else. But when we talk about compellence theory, it is mostly related to the theory of deterrence. In this situation, it is basically by getting B state to do what B would otherwise have done, would not otherwise have done. It essentially means you actually uh, force the rival country. You actually put your wish and whim on the state, other state, to do what it normally would not like to do. फोर्स करते हैं आप किसी स्टेट को, कोerशन यूज करते हैं, जिस तरह हमने कोerसिव डिप्लोमेसी पढ़ा था, जिसमें स्टेट्स जो होते हैं वो अपना असर रसूख इस्तेमाल करते हैं, अपना पावर यूज करते हैं कि वो दूसरी स्टेट को वो प्रेशराइज करके वो अपना काम निकलवा सकें. तो कंपेलेंस के अंदर इट इज बेसिकली स्ट्रेटजी ऑफ कंपेलेंस रिलाइज ऑन ऑफेंसिव थ्रेट, ठीक है, aimed at persuading an adversary to relinquish something without resistance. So compellence is basically the difference between compellence and deterrence is compellence is always offensive strategy, while deterrence is a defensive strategy in which you compellence you always go for taking an initiative of attacking first. So, or convincing the other state to do what it otherwise would not like to do. जो काम नहीं करना चाहता वो आप उससे वो कराना चाहते हैं, ठीक है. तो ये कंपेरेंस थियरी का कॉन्सेप्ट. डिटेरेंस में ये होता है कि जो उसने प्लान बनाया है, ठीक है, वो आप उसको फुलफिल नहीं करने देते. तो ये फर्क है डिटेरेंस और कंपेरेंस थियरी. ये दोनों एक दूसरे से इंटरलिंक्ड हैं. So deterrence seeks to dissuade an adversary from attacking some future action. The major assumption of deterrence theory is that defender has the ability to punish an adversary with unacceptably high cost if it launches an attack. So it is basically is to defend your territory. It is to defend your people from not being attacked by the other state. Generally, this compellence is more riskier than the deterrence, because in compellence you are using your overall capability to coerce, to force, to impose your will on the state, other state, to take the advantage, to take your work, whatever you have planned to do. So it is more riskier than the deterrence theory. Talking about case study of Iraq, let's apply to what had actually happened in the past. So let's discuss about Iraq of what happened in March 2003. Remember, there was 9/11, September 11, 2001. There was an attack on Twin Towers. Americans had to retaliate in response to the terrorist attack, to the attack by the non-state actor. So they initially started to launch an attack against Afghanistan, and started to initially they went for the Air Force attack. Then afterward they occupied the territory of Afghanistan. Later on, just 1.5 years later, it was Iraq which was under attack by the American forces. In that situation, America applied deterrence as well as it applied compellence theory. So here is how Americans adopted compellence theory. They wanted to actually install a puppet government in Iraq after unseating of Saddam Hussein from the politics of Iraq. They wanted to see another man which was supported by the American government themselves. So they wanted to install a stooge, a puppet, their person in the government, which should be supported by the American administration under the Bush administration. So that was called as regime change. So what is regime change? Regime change is a change of government. Uh, for example, if there is Nawaz Sharif is in power in Pakistan, so what would be the regime change? Regime change would be to install Imran Khan and make him as the prime minister of Pakistan. So that, in that situation, Iraq, what happened? There was Saddam Hussein was ruling before March 2003. But afterwards, when Iraq came under attack of the American troops and forces, they were actually installing the other person to rule the Iraqi government. That was known as regime change. So this was compelling theory. Then deterrence, how deterrence was actually adopted by the Americans in case of Iraq. They had imposed no-fly zone, NFZ. एनएफजी का दो मतलब होते हैं, एक तो होता है नो फ्लाई जोन, दूसरा होता है न्यूक्लियर फ्री जोन. यहाँ पे हम नो फ्लाई जोन की बात करें. नो फ्लाई जोन इज क्या होता है? नो फ्लाई जोन के अंदर आप किसी भी मुल्क में ये अगर ये इम्पोज करते हैं तो उसकी कोई भी कंट्री एयर स्पेस नहीं यूज कर सकता. ठीक है, जेट्स के लिए, कमर्शियल जेट्स हो या फाइटर जेट व्हाटएवर, तो उसकी अगर कोई भी कंट्री वायलेशन करेगा उसके खिलाफ एक्शन लिया जाएगा. तो इस सिचुएशन को, इस कंडीशन को, इस फिनोमिनन को हम नो फ्लाई जोन कहते हैं. तो डिटेरेंस के अंदर अमेरिकन ने बहुत सारे कंट्रीज जो इराक के एलाइज थे उनके लिए एयर स्पेस को आप कहें कि बैन कर दिया कि दे विल नॉट बी यूजिंग द Iraqi airspace by any countries. It might be a military plane or it might be a commercial plane. तो ये दोनों आपको नजर आते हैं कंपेलेंस में और डिटेरेंस थियरी को अडॉप्ट होते हुए in the case of Iraq war. How has this term deterrence came into inception? This term, this concept existed, but for the first time in literature, this got into the mainstream literature of international relations and political science for the first time in 1900s. 1900s के अंदर क्या हुआ? German Admiral Alfred von Trippertz, based upon his naval strategy, utilized this term, and he said Britain would hesitate to fight even with an inferior German navy if the losses incurred are greater, and further it would leave British Navy inferior to the rivals. तो इसका थोड़ा बैकग्राउंड मैं आपको बताता हूँ. बर्तानिया जो था, as you know, it has been a superior naval power in the world history. Why? Because they invest so much in the navy, because the geographic territory of the Britain is an island state. So an island needs more navy rather than a land army, right? So they would like to see countries like UK, countries like US, countries like Australia, New Zealand, or Japan even, they would need a more powerful naval force rather than the land army, primarily because they had to protect their coastline. So an island state has a coastline and they had to protect it. So naval power is the power which actually can protect the borders of an island state. So Britain was very superior. Britain's position as a naval power was more superior than the Germans. So the Germans actually got an idea from the ideas of one of the admiral, Alfred von Trippertz, that he said you had to you have to incur the losses in terms of human losses. कि इतने ज़्यादा इनके फौजी आप डैमेज करें या मार दें उनको, ताकि उनको ये साइकोलॉजिकली एक आप कहें कि ब्लो या साइकोलॉजिकली ये फ्रस्ट्रेट होके ये जंग करें जर्मन्स के साथ, और फिर जर्मन जो है उसको वो बर्तानिया को करने के लिए, उसकी नेवल पावर को करने के लिए तो जर्मन्स ने ये आइडिया अडॉप्ट किया, जैसे कि अल्फ्रेड वॉन ट्रिपर्ड्स ने अपने नेवल स्ट्रेटजी में बताया. Types of deterrence, there are three types of deterrence. Traditionally, there were two types of deterrence, but in the 21st century, there comes a third concept of deterrence theory. First one is deterrence by denial. In this situation, is we convince the aggressor that the incoming attack of the enemy will miserably fail. Deterrence by denial essentially means a kind of deterrence in which you deny the attack, incoming attack, as if nothing has happened. So, and deterrence by punishment means giving the aggressor in an impression that success would be achieved at an excessive or huge price, therefore punishment may be imposed. So in this situation, you have to create an impression to the aggressor, to the incoming attack, that whatever the aggressor state has a plan, they would achieve that plan, fulfill that plan at a higher price, at an excessive, huge cost, because the punishment would be so much in the form of retaliation that they could not bear the losses. So the better situation is not to attack the other state. So it is mounting an effective defense and launching retaliatory attack. So deterrence by punishment में retaliation के अंदर आप इतने ज़्यादा attacks को launch करते हैं कि जो state B ने जो आपको attack किया होता है, आपने उसका इतना response दिया होता है कि वो state A जो है बिल्कुल ख़त्म होता है, devastate हो जाता है. उसके जो लोग हैं, उसकी जो territories हैं, उसके जो इलाके हैं, वो बहुत ज़्यादा destroy हो जाते हैं, उनके पास कुछ बचता ही नहीं है. So deterrence comes at a very high cost. This is known as deterrence by punishment. Third concept is deterrence by presence. Deterrence by presence is a new concept. It is a recent phenomenon. It's a creation of the 21st century. It is only exercised by maintaining the UN peacekeeping forces. Whenever there is a conflict between two or more than two states, you actually try to deploy UN peacekeeping forces in that particular area. So the conflict gets averted for a time being. So in order to create ceasefire between two conflicting parties, you send the forces. You actually deploy the UN peacekeeping forces, and UN peacekeeping forces are known as blue helmets in the world. So with the presence of blue helmets, UN peacekeeping forces, you try to create a ceasefire in which both the countries cannot continue their war. So this deterrence is created by the presence of UN peacekeeping forces. There are many examples of this. There are states like Congo, states like Somalia, most of the African states, Rwanda, Burundi, and Cameroon and Central African Republic. There are many states in the African continent where UN peacekeeping forces have been deployed in order to avoid the ethnic war between different conflicting segments of the African society. This could be applied in case of Kashmir, because the Pakistan government's point of view is to deploy these troops in the Kashmir Valley along the side of line of control. Line of control is, remember, the division. There has not been peace over the last so many years, and line of control is in the line of fire these days. And there have been killings on both the sides, civilians as well as military, on daily basis. Troops are being dying. So what the Pakistan government proposes is to launch and propose a UN peacekeeping forces deployment over that line of control. But United Nations talks about the holding of plebiscite in that area. referendum between the Kashmiri people so that the fate of Kashmir could be decided. So this could be an example of this could be an example of utilizing UN peacekeeping forces inside Kashmir Valley. Another example is Cyprus. Cyprus is divided in two parts, Northern Cyprus and Southern Cyprus. Southern Cyprus is basically dominated by Greece, and the Northern Cyprus is controlled by Turkey. So there is a dispute on the Cyprus island, Cyprus issue, between the Turkish government and the Greek government. So they've not been able to resolve this issue. Geographically, Cyprus is very close to the borders of Turkey, and Turkey has a lot more influence in the Cyprus. So they would like to utilize Cyprus for their own benefit. So half of Cyprus belongs to Turkish government, controlled by Turkey, and half of it controlled by Greece. So the problem is over here is there could be a civil war between the Northern Cyprus and the Southern Cyprus. So what the UN has done, United Nations peacekeeping forces have been sent by the UN Security Council in order to avert the war between the Northern Cyprus and the Southern Cyprus. So in this situation, deterrence by presence is applied in case of Cyprus issue. What are the different components of deterrence theory? Different components could be three. There are three elements, components of deterrence theory in order to get implemented. So there are three essential things, essential element, essentialities for this theory to get implemented. So it depends upon obtaining the unquestionable ability to inflict intolerable damage on an opponent. Number one should be capability or capacity. You need to possess, you need to have, you need to own the military resources that are kind of a signal the adversary considers as a threat to their military retaliation. In case in that situation, military retaliation is possible. You must be capable to. If you don't have the capability to defend, you don't have the resources, you are not able to exercise deterrence theory. So the first thing is to have the resources to deter. Second is to credibility. Your resources should be credible enough that you could actually are willing to act on its declared threat. So whatever you're facing a threat from the rival country, you develop a belief in your society, in your people, in your government, that you are actually going to use those resources. So deterrence should be credible enough. जिसकी credibility हो, recognized हो, declared हो कि आप किसी भी incoming attack का जवाब जो है जवाब जिस तरह आप कहते हैं ईंट का जवाब पत्थर से देंगे. तो ये जो अगर कोई कंट्री आपको ईंट मारता है या उस यूटिलाइज करता है रिसोर्सेज को डिफेंड, तो आप उसको भी जवाब दे सकते हैं. तो credibility is a second component of deterrence theory. Third one is communication. Communication के अंदर you need to communicate, you need to convey, you need to signal the rival country. जो भी आपके साथ फाइट करना चाहता है, जिसने प्लान बनाया हुआ है, आप उसको कम्युनिकेट करते हैं कि आप जो अटैक करेंगे तो हम भी आपको उस तरह का जवाब देंगे, बल्कि उससे बढ़कर जवाब देंगे. तो ये पाकिस्तान इंडिया के केस में आपने देखा होगा, ये तीनों कंपोनेंट्स जो है ना वो अप्लाई होते हैं. दोनों कंट्रीज ने अपनी कैपेबिलिटीज़ को बताया हुआ है, क्रेडिबल भी हैं, दोनों के पास न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स हैं और भी रिसोर्सेज हैं, और उन्होंने एक दूसरे से कम्युनिकेट भी किया. हर साल ये अपने डिफरेंट जो है कैपेबिलिटीज़ की एक लिस्ट शेयर करते हैं जिसमें बताया जाता है कि ये आपके पास टेक्नोलॉजी है, और इन केस ऑफ एनी मिस एडवेंचर, मिस कैलकुलेशन, यू आर रेडी टू रिस्पॉन्ड. फॉर्म्स ऑफ डिटेरेंस, दो तरह के फॉर्म्स मिलते हैं दुनिया में, दो शक्लों में डिटेरेंस नज़र आता है हमें दुनिया में, ग्लोबल अफेयर्स में, इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस के अंदर. एक तो कन्वेंशनल डिटेरेंस है, दूसरा न्यूक्लियर डिटेरेंस. कन्वेंशनल डिटेरेंस के अंदर अदर देन द न्यूक्लियर कैपेबिलिटीज। कन्वेंशनल के अंदर इट्स ह्यूज लिस्ट ऑफ मिलिट्री हार्डवेयर, जिसके अंदर टैंक्स हैं, जिसके अंदर जहाज हैं, जिसके अंदर एंटी एयरक्राफ्ट गन्स हैं, जिसके अंदर डिफरेंट तरह के वेपन्स पाए जाते हैं। लेकिन जब न्यूक्लियर डिटेरेंस की बात करते हैं, इट वी एसेंशियली मीन्स न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स। सो जब दो कंट्रीज एक दूसरे को फेस कर रहे हैं न्यूक्लियर डिटेरेंस को, तो हम उस कॉन्सेप्ट को बैलेंस ऑफ टेरर कहते हैं, बैलेंस ऑफ पावर नहीं कहेंगे। कन्वेंशनल डिटेरेंस के अंदर बैलेंस ऑफ पावर की कोशिश की जाती है, हर कंट्री कोशिश करता है, जैसे कि हमने बैलेंस ऑफ पावर में पढ़ा था। तो जब न्यूक्लियर when two countries are actually having nuclear capability, nuclear resources, in that situation they won't be called balance of power, they would be balance of terror. Mechanism of deterrence theory is you need to have effective defense system. First of all, you need to have radar, you need to have early warning systems, you need to have submarines, you need to have jets, all kind of defense resources you must have. Dusra, there are states like India who has a policy of first strike capability, and they also have the second strike capability. First strike capability का मतलब था first use करना, ठीक है, initiate करना attack को पहले। दूसरा होता है second strike capability. Second strike capability के अंदर you need to develop a capacity to absorb an adversary's first strike attack with the weapons of mass destruction. कि आप पहले पंच खाएं एनिमी का, फिर आप उसको रिस्पॉन्ड करें, इसको हम सेकंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी। यू एब्जॉर्ब द इनकमिंग अटैक फर्स्ट एंड देन यू रिटेलिएट, ठीक है, इस चीज को हम सेकंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी। तो कुछ कंट्रीज के पास फर्स्ट स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटीज होती हैं, कुछ कंट्रीज के पास सेकंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी। So a state must have sufficient destructive ability in order to ensure the country can withstand an adversary first strike capability and still retaliate with a devastating counter attack. तो आप counter attack करते हैं second strike capability के अंदर। Then you have Cold War deterrence. Cold War के अंदर deterrence कैसे exercise हुआ था? कोल्ड वॉर के अंदर डिटेरेंस जो था, आपको याद होगा कि नेटो जो है बनाया गया था इन ऑर्डर टू डिटर द कम्युनिस्ट थ्रेट इन द वर्ल्ड। नॉर्थ अटलांटिक ट्रीटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनाई गई थी, अमेरिका ने इसको लीड किया था। और जब 49 में नेटो बना, तो उसके जवाब में सोवियत यूनियन ने एक और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनाई जिसका नाम था वार्सा पैक्ट। वार्सा पैक्ट वाज क्रिएटेड इन 1954, just 5 years after the establishment of NATO as an alliance. So NATO was an alliance of the capitalist countries. It was highly a military alliance. And responding to the threats of the NATO, the Soviet Union had to devise their own organization, which was a military alliance. Military alliance had a meeting in Warsaw city of Poland. और पोलैंड उस वक्त पार्ट था सोवियत यूनियन का। तो ये वार्सा पैक्ट बनाएगा वर्सेस नेटो। Therefore, NATO has opted for first strike option in case of Soviet aggression. सोवियत यूनियन remember बहुत ज़्यादा एक पावरफुल मुल्क था weapons wise, उनके पास न्यूक्लियर weapons भी थे। They developed capability in 1949. Americans did it in 1945. तो उन्होंने नेटो ने ये कहा कि हम पहले फर्स्ट स्ट्राइक का ऑप्शन इस्तेमाल करेंगे अगर सोवियत यूनियन ने कोई भी एग्रेशन की। चार्ल्स डे गॉल एडॉप्टेड नेशनल पॉलिसी ऑफ डिसुएशन इन 1956, यहाँ पे 56 आएगा, लेफ्ट नेटो एंड प्रेफर्ड इट्स ओन न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स। तो फ्रांस को ये कहा गया कि आप जब तक नेटो में रहेंगे तो नेटो आपकी हिफाजत करेगा, तो आपको कोई वेपन बना के न्यूक्लियर वेपन बनाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। लेकिन फ्रांस ने ये कहा कि नहीं, हम अपनी टेक्नोलॉजी न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स बनाएंगे। So they did not agree with the Americans and they left this NATO alliance. Afterwards they joined when they had acquired the nuclear capability. Post Cold War deterrence. कोल्ड वॉर की बाद क्या हुआ? पाकिस्तान इंडिया के केस में अगर आप देखें तो पाकिस्तान एक्चुअली detonated its nuclear device in 1998 1998 में को उन्होंने explosions किए when they responded to the second nuclear test conducted by India in the entire. First was 1974 when Indian tested the nuclear device. Second was in 1998. Then Pakistan actually had to retaliate because they were in possession of the nuclear weapons. So in order to create deterrence, they had detonated their nuclear device in Chagi district of Balochistan. And every year we, as a nation, celebrate Yom Takbir on 28 May to memorize those nuclear tests which were conducted. Deterrence in the nuclear age. It is an when the there was the invention of the nuclear weapons, defense became somehow possible, but somehow not possible, because those weapons which you consider can provide you defense are facing new kind of threat. I'll show you a documentary at the later stage. It's known as Nuclear Tipping Point. You'll come to understand what are the new threats to this nuclear age, 20%. Concept of exclusive destruction. And then second strike capability was the doctrine given by Robert McNamara, MAD theory, जिसको हम MAD कहते हैं. MAD theory is basically mutual assured destruction. MAD, I repeat, mutual assured destruction. ये अमेरिकन एक डिफेंस सेक्रेटरी थे जिसने ये डिवाइस की थी और ये कहा था कि अगर कोई मुल्क न्यूक्लियर वेपन रखता है, उसके पास पोजीशन है, तो वो अगर इस्तेमाल करता है दूसरी कंट्री के पास, तो दूसरा कंट्री भी अगर उसके पास न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स हैं तो वो इस्तेमाल कर सकता है. तो जब दोनों एक दूसरे के खिलाफ यूज करेंगे दोज न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स, द सिचुएशन would be like they will assure the mutual destruction. They will destroy each other. एक दूसरे को destroy, किसी का फायदा नहीं होगा. ठीक है, लूज लूज सिचुएशन होगी. विन सिचुएशन भी नहीं होगी, विन लूज भी नहीं होगी, लेकिन लूज लूज सिचुएशन होगी. तो दोनों एक दूसरे को डिस्ट्रॉय करेंगे इस सिचुएशन के अंदर. So the concept became more familiar in the jargons of international relations world, known as mutual assured destruction. तो ये mutual assured destruction तब possible होगी जब दोनों states के पास nuclear capability होगी. The idea of massive retaliation we will discuss later on when we'll be discussing American nuclear doctrine, and then with the inception of nuclear deterrence has given the new balance of power in the world. So what is the new balance of power? New balance of power is to have deterrence by developing a nuclear capability. The last one in the deterrence in the nuclear age point is that US President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, remember he was the one who actually was during the times of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1989 or 1979 के अंदर. उस वक्त 1980s के लास्ट फेज के अंदर इन्होंने एक प्रोग्राम लॉन्च किया जिसको वो SDI कहते थे. SDI stands for Strategic Defense Initiative. Strategic Defense Initiative was about fighting foreign threats from space by using space technology. That concept became known as Star Wars. Star Wars, you might have seen in the movies that basically how would they defend their country? They would be deploying the nuclear weapons in space, and from there they would launch they can launch the attacks to counter the incoming missiles in the Earth's atmosphere. Ronald Reagan, this plan never got to see the light of the day, did not get implemented, primarily because this was too expensive for the American administration to continue. The other was this needed a long-term vision that America had to invest so much in this future space war. critique on deterrence theory, one of the criticism on deterrence theory is that it never addresses uh, the challenges of cyber attacks, because in the 21st century the threats are not kind of a traditional threats. Threats are now non-traditional threats. Countries face cyber attacks very frequently. Countries have to face bioweapons. Countries facing the chemical use of chemicals against their state. So these are what things which defy the deterrence theory. Deterrence does not address these kind of threats. Deterrence is basically uh, a kind of a concept which only addresses the traditional aspects of security threats. Now, as I said, the threats are of different nature these days. So again, states have to move on from traditional deterrence theory to another one. But still, we haven't been able to see any such concept which addresses the non-traditional security threats to the states. The concept of deterrence depends upon the threat of certain retaliation that would cause an irrational attacker to think twice. So if the attacker can't be found, then the certainty of retaliation dissolves and deterrence might not be possible. According to one of the scholars, which was known as Hoffman, he said it in his book in 2011, that you are not certain about your enemy. You never know who's the enemy, right? Because cyber attacks, you cannot identify the people who are behind this. Very difficult to come to know about your rivals in the space or in the cyber world. Therefore, we can never expect warning of an impending attack and chance of defense. It is not likely that the perpetrator is going to give you that opportunity. It's very difficult to find out who the perpetrator is, according to the Nobel Prize winner Joshua Lederberg. What has been the U.S. strategy? U.S. strategy is to construct a defensive shield against ballistic missiles. Americans are working on BMD system. BMD system is ballistic missile defense system. This is a kind of an anti-ballistic missile defense system using space-based lasers that would destroy the enemy nuclear attacks missiles before they could enter into the Earth atmosphere. This is again related to what we talked about when we were talking about SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, which was initiated by the Reagan administration in US. Ballistic missile system was used as an integrated system of ground, sea, and space based upon radars, giving us the power to detect, intercept, and destroy weapons launched in fear, anger, or by accident. So a war can be out of fear, a war can be out of anger, war can be out of an accident or miscalculation. The third one is more possible. Nuclear war is more of an accidental war. Reagan was of the view that making nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete and shift nuclear strategy away from mad concept. So he was of the view that we should not go for such concept in which nuclear powers have the capability. So he was not in favor of the use of the nuclear weapons because the other state also had the power to retaliate. So he tried to shift American strategy from nuclear strategy away from the mad concept. The Americans had to start their BMD system in order to in order to acquire a nuclear shield against the incoming missile attack over US. Now let's address the last part of the deterrence concept, in which various countries have various doctrines. Looking at Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is that previously in the Musharraf administration, they had this minimum credible nuclear deterrence. Now they've shifted from minimum credible nuclear deterrence to the full spectrum nuclear deterrence. Full spectrum nuclear deterrence means use of tactical nuclear weapons, TNWs. Tactical nuclear weapons are those weapons which are very on a small scale, use of uranium or plutonium, they could be utilized quickly against a territorial attack over the sovereignty of Pakistan. In that situation, Pakistan state has exercised or has a planning of full spectrum nuclear deterrence. While looking at Indians' nuclear deterrence doctrine is to no first use. Indians start in 1974 as they called their own nuclear device as Smiling Buddha. Smiling Buddha, Buddhism actually talks about not hurting the human beings. Right? So Indians, they try to the um, symbolize their nuclear device as the peaceful nuclear test. But as we know, that no nuclear weapon is a peaceful. So they are essentially nuclear weapons are essentially the weapons of war, not weapons of peace. Which countries they are weapons of peace? Which countries weapons of war? So again, if you had acquired the nuclear technology, you can always use for war purposes. By looking at the American nuclear doctrine, is to initially they started the nuclear doctrine from MAD concept, mutual assured destruction, which we have talked about. This MAD theory was given by this Robert McNamara as Defense Secretary of State during the Harry Truman administration in 1940s, in which both the countries can use nuclear weapons against each other, and they destroy each other. That was a mad concept. Afterward, in the Dwight Eisenhower administration, after Harry Truman, they had to rethink, reconsider this mad concept, moved away from mad concept to the massive retaliation. Now, what is massive retaliation? Massive retaliation is a concept in which you try to establish a Soviet Union communism containment by pledging to respond to any act of aggression with the most destructive capability available, including nukes. Brinkmanship is Secretary of State John Foster Dulles used to threaten U.S. adversary with a nuclear destruction and population center, the industrial zone, so that on the brink of war, they would concede to use U.S. demands. So massive retaliation is a kind of a concept in which you mobilize all the defense material that you have as a state. जितनी भी चीज़ें आपके पास हैं जो आपको डिफेंस इन्विंसिबल बना सकते हैं, तो वो आप उसको आप कंट्रीज को कन्विंस करेंगे, कम्युनिकेट करेंगे कि जो भी इनकमिंग अटैक हो आप सारे रिसोर्स को यूटिलाइज करें. So retaliation would be massive, so huge that the cost of the incoming attack would not be possible. Mutual assured destruction, as I had explained to you, but there is one explanation more further into this. It describes the strategic balance between US and Soviet Union after Cuban Missile Crisis 1962. Cuban Missile Crisis was the era of 1962 when John F. Kennedy had to decide to neutralize the incoming threats from the Soviet Union because there were lots of weapons deployed in Cuba. And Cubans, they had plans to attack many cities of US. New York, Washington, California, Florida, all other cities, they were on the launch button. So in that situation, they had facing this nuclear threat from the Soviet Union. Regardless of who struck first, the other side destroyed each other. Attack under these circumstances, initiating a nuclear war was not a rational choice. Costs are high, then the benefits are less in this mad concept. So Khrushchev said, if you reach for the push button, you reach for the suicide. So that will be a suicidal war. If both the countries use nuclear weapons, they go for suicide. They kill each other. They destroy each other. And no countries get the benefit out of the nuclear war. The nuclear war doesn't have a winner. Every country who uses nuclear weapons has to be a loser at the end. Churchill said the Sturgey child and surviving the twin brothers of annihilation. So it's like nuclear weapons, they are like double-edged swords. The third American nuclear doctrine, which we did not touch, was preemptive nuclear doctrine, a preventive attack. Preemptive attack क्या होते हैं? Bush administration of 2001 actually had to launch this, come up with this theory that the attacking the enemy first before they attack you, preempt करना, झगड़े जो अटैक है, जो हमला है, उसकी पहल आप करें और आपके पास ये इंटेलिजेंस मौजूद हो कि वो दूसरा कंट्री आपको प्लान कर रहा है अटैक, तो उससे पहले वो अटैक करें, आप उसको कर दें. This was very highly offensive strategy devised by the Bush administration, जिसके अंदर इराक वॉर के अंदर ये इस्तेमाल किया गया था इसको, जिसमें ये बताया गया कि इराक was in possession of the chemical and biological weapons, so before they use against the Americans would destroy those weapons. But what was the result? According to Hans Fleck's report, there were no possession of the such weapons from Iraq. So all the war which started, Iraq war, was on, depending upon what was a lie, was a hoax, was a false war initiated by Americans. So with this, I come to an end with the deterrence theory. If you have any question, we can address. And then we move on to another session on national security. Okay, responding to the question of Ikra Shah is, sir, the point of deterrence in Iraq case is not clear. Maintenance of no-fly zone was used as a deterrence technique by the American Iraq war. Look, अगर एक जंग चल रही है किसी मुल्क के अंदर, तो आप उसके अंदर जो दूसरा आपका कंटेस्टेंट, इराक के केस में जो इराकीज थे जो नहीं चाहते थे कि अमेरिका इसको ऑक्युपाई करे इराक टेरिटरी को, वो उनके पास ऑप्शन था कि वो कोई मैसिव अटैक लॉन्च कर लें अमेरिकन बेसिस के ऊपर. तो उन्होंने क्या किया, अमेरिकन ने इससे पहले कि वो इराकीज उसको उस एयर स्पेस को यूज़ करें अपने मुल्क को ओवर दी इंस्टॉलेशंस एंड दी एरियाज वेयर दे वर कंट्रोल्ड बाय अमेरिकन्स, तो अमेरिकन्स ने उनको एक नो फ्लाई जोन डिक्लेयर किया ताकि वो डिटेरेंस थियरी को एक्सरसाइज कर सकें. फ्यूचर अटैक पॉसिबल था कि एयर के थ्रू हो, तो उन्होंने उससे पहले उसको बैन कर दिया. And Iraqis had this option of using airspace over attacking the American interest. ठीक है, तो इस केस के अंदर हम कह सकते हैं कि जो नो फ्लाई जोन का जो कॉन्सेप्ट होता है, हम डिटेरेंस को एक्सरसाइज कर सकते हैं. I hope I'm clear to you. Muhammad Ali's point of view is, sir, can you please explain the viewpoint of Churchill? Churchill's point of view was that double annihilation. ठीक है, कि एक तो मैड कॉन्सेप्ट जो है उसके अंदर, एक तो आप दूसरी कंट्री को चलें डिस्ट्रॉय करते हैं, लेकिन दूसरा कंट्री भी तो आपके खिलाफ वो रिसोर्स यूटिलाइज कर सकता है. तो ये डबल एनाइलेशन का कॉन्सेप्ट दिया था उन्होंने कि नो यूज ऑफ न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स. तो ये न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स के सख्त खिलाफ. I hope I'm clear to you. Sayyida Zainab is talking about when India had strategy of NFU, then why it attacked Pakistan in 1974? Did it attack in 1974? In 1998, in the first place. अच्छा, ये आई गेस 74 में ना इंडियंस ने कभी नहीं अटैक किया और ना ही 98 में किया था. कहाँ पे किया? Babar Ali says, sir, please repeat the concept of nuclear no first use. Nuclear free zone. यहाँ पे मैंने nuclear free zone की बात नहीं की, मैंने बात की है no first use की, NFU की बात की है. नो फर्स्ट यूज का मतलब ये होता है कि आप अपनी जो न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स हैं उसका इस्तेमाल पहले नहीं करेंगे, कोई और कंट्री करेगा फिर उसकी आप जवाबी कार्रवाई करेंगे. आई होप आई एम क्लियर टू यू. सागर नागपाल, यस, फर्स्ट यूज और प्रिवेंटिव अटैक का एक ही मतलब है. बिल्कुल ठीक. सर, नगानो काराबाख में फिर यूएन पीस कीपिंग फोर्सेस क्यों नहीं थी? Nagorno Karabakh is a disputed territory. It has been disputed territory. Now it is resolved. It is now gained by Azerbaijan. But in Nagorno Karabakh situation, there were no UN peacekeeping forces. Okay, responding to the question of Zainab is basically post Cold War deterrence की हम जब बात करते हैं इसका मतलब हम केस स्टडी करते हैं पाकिस्तान इंडिया की. As you know, Pakistan acquired this nuclear technology in 1987, but it never tested it. Why? Because at that time there were lots of sanctions over Pakistan put by Americans. तो उन्होंने फिर इसको टेस्ट नहीं किया था। टेस्ट तब किया जब 1998 में दोबारा मई के अंदर, मई के मंथ में जो इंडियंस ने जब टेस्ट किया, आप इसको अटैक ना समझिए, टेस्ट किया था अपने मुल्क के अंदर ही, तो उसका रिस्पॉन्ड किया था पाकिस्तान ने। तो इस सिचुएशन, इस मतलब इरा को हम पाकिस्तान इंडिया के स्टडी में ले सकते हैं कि डिटेरेंस कैसे पॉसिबल था। डिटेरेंस इस तरह पॉसिबल, दोनों ने कन्वे किया, कन्विंस किया कि दोनों कंट्रीज के पास न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स हैं, किसी भी जारियत में, एडवेंचर में दोनों एक दूसरे का नुकसान कर सकते हैं। तो इसको हम पोस्ट कोल्ड वॉर डिटेरेंस कह सकते हैं। आई होप आई एम क्लियर। Yeah, responding to the question of Ikra is kindly explain deterrence by presence. Deterrence by presence essentially means when you deploy the UN peacekeeping forces in order to have peace between two conflicting states or two conflicting parties. Presence of the UN peacekeeping forces, UN के forces को deploy किया जाए, उस सूरत हाल को हम डिटेरेंस बाय प्रेजेंस कहते हैं। ठीक है। Okay, let's talk about various dimensions of national security. National security has witnessed quite a change in its outlook. Now, we used to discuss some security in the form of traditional security, which means it included the subjects which are related to war, conflicts, issues with terrorism and deterrence. But now people's lives are threatened and secure in contemporary global politics through the non-traditional security. Non-traditional security essentially means um, is that countries are facing famines, crimes on daily basis, diseases like COVID-19, Ebola virus, HIV/AIDS, disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, environmental degradation, climate change, global warming, and human rights violation, human rights abuses, child abuse, women molestation, and other issues. So these are what? These are issues which are related to the non-traditional security threats. So countries are facing so many issues which are known as non-traditional security issues. So the first one is you states were limited to the military threats related to the issues of high politics. High politics issues which were related to issues related to the political stability of various countries, directly related to the government. While the non-security essentially mean non-state actors. Countries like Pakistan, PTP, Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other non-state actors were actually playing their game inside various countries of the world. Um, then security also essentially means economic security or economic threats, famines, hungers, depression. You had inflation, you had financial crises, you have economic statecraft issues, you have less per capita, you have issue of unemployment, you have issue of growth rate. So you have lots more issues. So country today they are facing economic threats more as compared to the military threats. Another dimension of these non-traditional security threats means threats of identity crisis. Catalonia, you have Basque, you have Galicia, Xinjiang issue, Uyghurs, and then you have Chechens in Russia, and we had Kurd issue in Turkey. Many crises, identity crises happening in the world simultaneously. So there are countries which are trying to grapple with these identity indigenous issues inside their territories. And frequent human rights abuses are very much happening in the world. In our country, like Pakistan, we are experiencing child abuse. We are experiencing, molestation of the women in general, not getting their rights. So again, there are lots of problems our country are facing. Environmental threats needs issues related to climate change, global warming, ozone depletion, sea intrusion, floods, cyclones, typhoons, tornadoes, twisters, and other natural disasters. Non-traditional security essentially also means health security. You have to state like all the states have to work to avoid the pandemics, rise of uh, you know diseases in the world, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, dengue, Congo, bird flu, Ebola virus, and other COVID-19 issues. So COVID-19 is now a global issue. It's a global problem. Where does it come from? It is a health hazard, and it is affecting all over the world. And that is why we are having this online classes. Otherwise, we will not be having these online classes. So because of the COVID-19, the world has been affected to the extent that physical interaction is not possible on a normal daily basis. You had these natural threats, you had disasters, that countries are facing, like earthquakes, like cyclones, like bushfires in Australia and California and US. So countries are facing these natural threats. These days in Australia, you are witnessing bushfires. Many of the Australians are facing in different parts of Australia. And there is no solution to this because climate is changing itself. So Australians, they are pretty much disturbed by this bushfires. Same goes for California and US. California is a city, is basically a state, part of US, experiencing the same wildfires happening in case of Australian colony. Accidental threats, maybe in the form of collateral damage. Collateral damage is a kind of damage in which you kind of kills terrorists, and besides those terrorists, there are innocent civilians, they are being targeted and killed. That is known as collateral damage. And the other part is nuclear accidents. Nuclear accident in the form of Chernobyl 1907. Chernobyl 87 में क्या हुआ था? Chernobyl एक शहर था यूक्रेन का. At that time was part of Soviet Union. Was destroyed due to the nuclear fumes. Thousands of people got killed, they migrated, they left their places, they left their home because of this nuclear blast in the nuclear plant, accidentally. दूसरा example is Fukushima nuclear plant, which was in Japan in 2011. तो 2011 में Fukushima के अंदर भी ये प्रॉब्लम फेस करना पड़ा था स्टेट्स को. एंड किस तरह हुआ था? वो सुनामी वहाँ पे एक आया था, सुनामी की वजह से वो न्यूक्लियर प्लांट के अंदर ब्लास्ट हुए थे, तो लोग उससे बहुत ज़्यादा डैमेज हुए. The last threat is criminal threats. अगर criminal threats consistently रहेंगे किसी भी मुल्क के अंदर, तो उसकी मुल्क की इकॉनमी उससे बहुत ज़्यादा, अगर इकॉनमी डिस्टर्ब होगी, again it is directly causing to the problem to the national security. The criminal threat that Pakistan was facing in Karachi for the last decade or so has been eliminated by the armed forces and the rangers. There were mobile snatching, there were car snatching, there were threats given to the people, there were extortion on daily basis. तो मुल्क होते हैं अगर consistently, frequently criminal threats को अगर witness करते हैं, तो उससे मुल्क की इकॉनमी बहुत डिस्टर्ब होती है. और अगर ये चलता रहेगा सिस्टम, तो फिर आपका मुल्क की सिक्योरिटी इश्यूज को बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम फेस करना पड़ता है. So overall, these variety of threats, they are known as human security. Human security is global security. Human security को हम कैसे define करेंगे? A major popular and liberal theory of degree to which the welfare of individuals protected and promoted, in contrast to the realist theory emphasizing and putting states' interest in military and national security ahead of all other goals. तो जो लोग होंगे उनकी वेलफेयर को इंश्योर करना, all kinds of individuals across different cultures, across different languages, across their historical background, across their ethnic allegiances or affiliations, across their color, caste, creed, whatever. आप इंडिविजुअल्स को क्या करेंगे? उनकी वेलफेयर के लिए काम करेंगे. तो ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी इज बेसिकली द ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट और ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी. जैसे कि रियलिस्ट होते हैं वो अपने बात कर रहे हैं स्टेट के इंटरेस्ट को, लेकिन लिबरल्स बात करते हैं ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी की. सो ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी एसेंशियली a concept by the liberal theory. Human security, often seen as having a variety of dimensions. It includes economic security and assured basic income, food security, physical and economic access to basic food, health security, protection from disease and unhealthy lifestyles. Environmental security includes protection from human-induced environment degradation. Personal security includes protection from all forms of physical violence or domestic violence. Community security, protection for traditional identity and values. Political security, the existence of rights and freedoms to protect people from tyranny. or government abuse, a nation that continues year after year to expend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching its spiritual doom. So here I come to the conclusion of my lecture on national security. If you have any question, we can deal with it. Otherwise, we have one documentary related to the concept of deterrence and the nuclear security in the 21st century.
I want to introduce this film from the standpoint of a soldier who was taught to use nuclear weapons and as a diplomat who worked hard for their elimination. As a 21-year-old second lieutenant assigned to Germany, one of my first missions was to guard an atomic cannon, a huge machine that ran around Germany on a couple of trucks. And its mission was to shoot nuclear weapons at the Russian armed forces if they ever came across the border in the vicinity of the Fulda Gap. A few years later, as a captain, I was taught how to actually employ this weapon and other similar weapons. I was taught how to determine what the blast effects of such weapons would be, how many people would be killed by the blast, how many buildings would be knocked down. I was also taught what the thermal effects would be, how things would be burned, how people would be burned. I was taught about the radiation effects, and I was taught to plot the fallout pattern that would come from the use of nuclear weapons as the dirt was thrown up into the sky and spread out across the landscape. Many years later, as a Corps commander back in Germany, commanding 75,000 troops, my mission was to stop the waves of Russian forces that would be coming through the Fulda Gap. And in those days, we thought we could only stop the first or second wave before we would have to call for nuclear weapons to stop the rest of the Russian armies coming through. And I would work with my staff to look at the effects of using nuclear weapons in West Germany on our side of the border against Russian armies that had come through. And we thought about what the Russians would do in return, and we wondered whether or not it could be stopped at that level or whether it would escalate all the way up to strategic thermonuclear exchange, with all that would mean for the existence of the world, all the millions of people who would be killed by such an exchange. It was an existential issue, and the more I got into nuclear weapons, the more I realized these weapons must never be used. And then I became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989, and I had 28,000 nuclear weapons under my supervision. And every morning I looked to see where the Russian submarines were off the coast of Virginia and how far away those missiles were from Washington. And I kept track of where the Russian missiles were in Europe and in the Soviet Union. And the one thing I convinced myself of after all these years of exposure to the use of nuclear weapons is that they were useless. They could not be used. So you can have deterrence with an even lower number of weapons. Well, then why stop there? Why not continue on? Why not get rid of them altogether? The real threat now is not from states that understand that you cannot use these weapons without inviting suicidal response, but terrorists who do not care about suicidal response, terrorists who are prepared to commit suicide themselves. And so it is important at this point in our international history that we all come together behind this initiative that you're going to hear about to make sure that we start a process that will lead to the reduction in the number of nuclear weapons that exist in the arsenals of the world now, that will deter other nations from moving forward on nuclear weapons programs, but above all, will capture and contain the elements that are out there, the devices that are out there, the technology that is out there, the uranium and plutonium sources that may be out there that a terrorist could get his hands on to try to develop a rudimentary or a real nuclear weapon. This is a noble cause, and what you're about to hear are 4 men who have worked in this field for most of their adult lives, who have given their lives to protecting our nation, but at the same time believe that this is the moment when we have to move forward and all of us come together to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and then eliminate them from the face of the earth. The film features 4 of the most distinguished Americans I have ever had the privilege of serving with, 4 men who I can call my dear friends. Former Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, and former Senator Sam Nunn. I think you will find this film interesting, and I hope it will motivate you to support this effort. Thank you.
is not a theoretical question. The 9/11 Commission reports Al-Qaeda has been trying to acquire or make a nuclear weapon for a decade. Could they do that? Highly enriched uranium and plutonium, the raw material to make a bomb, is scattered over about 40 countries, sometimes under very lax security. According to the 9/11 Commission, once terrorists get these materials, a trained nuclear engineer could fashion a bomb using commercially available materials and machine tools. The terrorists who want that material don't need much of it, and there are lots of places where they could steal it. Four men who helped navigate the Cold War, four Cold Warriors, know all too well the dangers we face. Former Secretary of State George Shultz knows firsthand the devastation nuclear weapons can cause from his World War II service in the Pacific. Former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger lived daily with the threat of a nuclear exchange while in the White House. Former Secretary of Defense William Perry knows all too well how close the world has come to nuclear annihilation. And former Senator Sam Nunn has devoted much of his career to preserving this nation's security while reducing the danger of a nuclear exchange. Working with the Nuclear Threat Initiative, co-chaired by Ted Turner and Sam Nunn, and the Hoover Institution, the four have formed the Nuclear Security Project, a nonpartisan effort to link the vision of a world free of nuclear weapons with urgent steps to be taken to reduce nuclear risks. They first proposed their vision and the essential steps in a Wall Street Journal article that sent shockwaves through the global foreign policy establishment. Their message was a simple one. If we want other nations of the world to join us in a tough approach to preventing nuclear terrorism and the continued spread of nuclear weapons, we must be willing to recommit to the vision of a world without nuclear weapons and to lead the world in taking concrete actions to reduce nuclear dangers. The actions, a series of urgent and achievable steps, are an agenda for change, for a more secure and safer world. The four recognize this bold agenda cannot be accomplished by the United States alone. These goals must become a joint enterprise among nations to make urgently needed progress to reduce the risks now posed by nuclear weapons and materials. But progress must be made, a simple truth they know from personal experience. George Shultz was a young Marine on a ship headed for the invasion of Japan when he first heard of nuclear weapons.
And we had hardly left our harbor when news came to the ship that something called an atomic bomb had been dropped. And we asked around, nobody had a clue about what it was. Our ship lumbered along, and then we heard another atomic bomb had been dropped. By the time we got to port, the war was over. We couldn't help but make the association that
of all the decisions that were before me, That was the most haunting one.
Back during the Cold War, we basically had a period, as I view it, of very high risk. But we had stability in one strange paradoxical sense, and that is both sides knew that if there was a war, or if a conventional war became a nuclear war, that the survival of their own nation was at stake. We collectively were diligent in terms of maintaining the weapons, in terms of maintaining security. We were very conscious and sensitive to the great dangers of those weapons in most cases, and we were very good at what we were doing in terms of the professional men and women in the military, indeed on both sides. But we were also very lucky. There were a number of times that I know about, and probably a lot more that I don't know about, where only by the grace of God did we avoid going to war.
It was about 1978 when I was awoken by a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the general who was the watch officer at the North American Air Defense Command. And he told me that his computers were showing 200 missiles on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. Now, that, of course, was a false alarm. The point of that story is that the danger of a nuclear war, the danger of a nuclear holocaust, was not academic to me. That experience in particular brought it very close to my consciousness.
People talk about the concept of deterrence. It worked in an uneasy way during the Cold War when you had two countries mainly. But the more countries you have, the more difficult that concept is.
And if the existing nuclear countries cannot develop some restraints among themselves, in other words, if nothing fundamental changes, then I would expect that a use of nuclear weapons in some 10-year period is very possible.
The world has changed since the end of the Cold War. More countries have nuclear weapons and others are attempting to develop nuclear weapons capabilities. The world needs energy, and that has many countries understandably turning to nuclear power, which, unless safely and securely managed, could also spread sensitive technologies to make the materials essential to a nuclear bomb. The simple fact is, we need new strategies to deal with today's nuclear threats.
If you can learn how to enrich fuel for a nuclear power plant, you've learned how to enrich it for a weapon.
And we have seen already in a country like Pakistan, which is a reasonably well-developed country, that a whole system of proliferation was either possible or tolerated that spread nuclear technology to Libya, North Korea, and some other rogue states.
As nations like Iran and Pakistan, North Korea get nuclear bombs, then the probability increases that one or more of those bombs will fall into the hands of a terror group.
The classical notion of deterrence was that there were some consequences before which aggressors and evildoers would recoil. In a world of suicide bombers, that calculation doesn't operate in any comparable way.
And if you think of the people who are doing suicide attacks, and people like that get a nuclear weapon, they are almost by definition not deterrable. And if you have terrorists get something, then you don't even know the return address. So I think it's a very dangerous moment.
The danger is not simply more nations with nuclear weapons, but that material to make a bomb is scattered around the world. A lot of potential sources for terrorists.
No terror group that we are aware of, even if they're well-financed and well-organized, can build a nuclear weapon from scratch. But if they got the fissile material through another nation, either by buying or stealing it, if they got the right kind of fissile material, then it's not simple to build a nuclear weapon, but it is feasible.
Plans for such a device were found on computers that were part of the AQ Khan smuggling ring, a gang that we know sold nuclear weapons information and equipment to Libya, Iran, North Korea, and possibly other nations or terrorist groups. We don't know who might have those plans. We do know that nuclear technology, closely guarded during the Cold War, has gradually seeped into the global information database. The International Atomic Energy Agency says there have been more than 1,300 nuclear smuggling incidents since 1993, nearly 20 of which have involved the transfer of weapons-usable material. The director of the agency has sounded the alarm, warning that the possibility of terrorists obtaining nuclear or other radioactive material remains a grave threat, and that sometimes material is found that had not been reported missing.
We know several things. We know that the know-how in terms of how to make a crude weapon has exploded over the last 10, 15 years. So the availability of information about the science required to make a weapon is out there now. Not a piece of cake, but doable. The second thing we know is the nuclear material, highly enriched uranium, plutonium is spread all over the world. And without the material, you can't make a weapon. And the third thing we know is the terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, but not limited to Al-Qaeda, are seeking this nuclear material and would like to make a weapon. They've said so, and I believe them.
There are still a lot of bombs, or the material to make them, that terrorists could steal or perhaps buy on the black market. They don't need much. The amount of highly enriched uranium used in the Hiroshima bomb could have fit in a 1-gallon milk jug. Here's what that did.
And of course, I always have in the back of my mind these pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the devastation.
I have been writing about nuclear weapons for over 50 years now. I try to apply traditional diplomatic principles to a world with nuclear weapons. And I found it almost, I would say, impossible to do. So the consequences have to be looked at two levels. One is technically what happens if, say, a 20-kiloton weapon hits downtown New York. And that's a very small weapon.
We're talking probably about 100,000 casualties, economic losses in hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. But beyond that, the political and the social catastrophe is something that we cannot even really imagine today.
Most of the hospitals, most of the medical facilities, most of the powers, most of the bridges, most of the communications would be gone.
We all believed that a terrorist group would claim responsibility and then go on to assert that they had planted bombs in perhaps 5 other cities of the United States and were threatening to set them off unless certain demands were met. And it's almost impossible to contemplate the hysteria and the terror that would set in. You can imagine the people fleeing from the cities. The social and economic structure of the United States collapsing under that.
There's a second level, namely, what do people think happened that permitted such casualties to occur? And what will the demand of their government? And if they will probably say globally, if this can't be prevented, what's the use of any government?
Well, first I should say that the call to eliminate nuclear weapons is not new. It has been stated many times by many people.
Today, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
There is only one way safely and legitimately to reduce the cost of national security, and that is to reduce the need for it. And this we're trying to do in negotiations with the Soviet Union. We're not just discussing limits on a further increase of nuclear weapons. We seek instead to reduce their number. We seek the total elimination one day of nuclear weapons from the face of the earth.
President Reagan and Soviet President Gorbachev came close to agreement on that vision in 1986 when the two met in Reykjavik, Iceland. But disagreements over missile defense proved a stumbling block.
Out of it all came this notion that we would try to eliminate ballistic missiles, eliminate nuclear weapons, but all contingent on confining strategic defense to the laboratory. And I remember Gorbachev said to the president, "Mr. President, if we agree to eliminate ballistic missiles, why do you need a defense against them?" And President Reagan said, "We'll share our technology with you." And Gorbachev said, "Mr. President, you won't even sell milk technology to us." And things sort of ended on that sort of a note. But the idea of eliminating ballistic missiles and the idea of eliminating nuclear weapons had been discussed seriously. And both the leader of the Soviet Union and the leader of the United States had said they agreed with that idea.
I believe that Reykjavik was the real pinnacle of international politics. That is to say, from the high ground, we saw the prospects of a future world, and we both believed that a world of the future could prosper only if it's a world without nuclear weapons.
We know from historical record that both presidents were serious about eliminating weapons, but that was a controversial idea ahead of its time.
I went to Brussels to brief our allies and then back to Washington. And one of the first things that happened was Margaret Thatcher came to Washington, and she invited me over to the British ambassador's residence, and she took me to the woodshed. And going along with the president on the idea of getting rid of nuclear weapons, are you out of your mind? And then she went up to Camp David, and I'm sure she'd sort of gotten it out of her system a little bit with me. I'm an easier target. But she gave President Reagan a dose of the same. President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev put this subject on the table, but the world, it was shocking to the world.
The Reykjavik summit did lead to landmark nuclear arms reduction treaties, but President Reagan and President Gorbachev's vision was not realized. 2 decades later, at a conference at the conservative Hoover Institution, the idea of a new and different initiative was born, one that could deal with the new challenges facing our world.
In our meetings at Stanford a few years ago, on the anniversary of the Reykjavik summit, we came to believe then that the idea of eliminating nuclear weapons had finally come.
We were convinced, all of us, that we could not keep asking other societies to restrain their participation in the nuclear field if we were not prepared to accept limits to our activities. So we began to look at steps that we could take to show America's commitment.
What is perhaps new about this initiative is that the 4 people whose names were attached to it are all what you might call Cold Warriors, the people who had prominent positions during the Cold War in building up the nuclear weapons of the United States.
All of us had
Do we have Abdullah? Abdullah? You can say yes, sir, or present, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Abdul Samad? Abdul Samad? Okay, Abdul Samad is not here. Abdul Wasi? Abdul Wasi? Not here. Abdullah Khan?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Abu Bakr?
Present, sir.
Aga Awais?
Present, sir.
Ali Mustafa?
Present, sir.
Aliza? Aliza is not here. Okay. Asghar Ali? Asghar Ali? Okay. Then we have Babar Ali?
Yes, sir.
Bakhtawar?
Present.
Bakhtawar? Bakhtawar है? नहीं. Hamida?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Faizan? Faizan? Falak Naz?
Present, sir.
Farhan?
Present, sir.
Hashmat Ali?
Present, sir.
Ikra?
Present, sir.
Ikra Shah?
Present, sir.
Irman?
Present, sir.
Koya?
Present, sir.
Laiba?
Present, sir.
Laros?
Yes, sir.
Mariam?
Present, sir.
Mehtab?
Present, sir.
Muhammad Ali?
Present, sir.
Muhammad Awais?
Yes, sir.
Muhammad Kamal? Muhammad Kamal?
Present, sir.
Muhammad Umar?
Present, sir.
Nausheen? नौशीन है नहीं रुकैया 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 is not here. Okay. Sagar?
Yes, sir.
Saika? साइका साइका आपके यहाँ डिस्टॉर्शन है ठीक है मेरे यहाँ प्रॉब्लम नहीं है आपके यहाँ प्रॉब्लम है आप कोई फिर आप डिवाइस चेंज कर लें या अगर आप मोबाइल यूज़ करें तो आप अपना लैपटॉप यूज़ करें लैपटॉप यूज़ करें मोबाइल यूज़ करें आपके यहाँ प्रॉब्लम है ठीक है आप अपने इशू को
नहीं सर हमें भी आ रही है नॉइज
अच्छा बाकी लोगों को नहीं आ रही
सर आ रही है
सर
अच्छा ओके लेट्स सी मैं अपने ऑफिस का यूज कर रहा हूँ ना वो
सर में दर्द हो गया
अच्छा चले मैं कल चेक करवाता हूँ उनसे
सर बैकग्राउंड में नॉइस है
बैकग्राउंड में बिल्कुल भी नॉइज नहीं है खामोश है कोई नहीं ऑफिस में कोई भी नहीं है
सर ये आई थिंक माइक इशू है हेडफोन्स के, उसको चेंज कर लो।
हो सकता है।
यस सर, यही होगा।
चलो फिर इसको चेंज करता हूँ। ठीक है, आई एम यूजिंग Core i7। यहाँ पे जो पीसी दिया है तो ये तो बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहा है। हो सकता है हेडफोन में इशू। अच्छा, सागर के बाद फिर साइका है सना बेग,
Present, sir.
सना वजी,
Present, sir.
शहजादी लारेब हैं, सिदरतुल मुंतहा नहीं है। ओके, सोना,
Present, sir.
अनीस फातिमा,
Present, sir.
ज़ैनब,
Present, sir.
मोहम्मद अफजाल,
यस सर।
विशाल,
Present, sir.
मोहम्मद फैज, गुलाम सकीना,
Present, sir.
ज़ियाउर रहमान।
Present, sir.
Thank you so much.